Not closing. Yeah, got it. Okay. So that was a short title that I had given, including quality and excellence issues in higher and technical education. But really, the topics I'm going to cover I've got here: accreditation, the global accreditation systems, the national system, etc., issues of quality, and then rankings, which are becoming extremely important in all countries in the world with the globalization of education, higher education, and technical education. Benchmarking, this is a term that is used increasingly these days, and a roadmap for excellence in higher and technical education. Essentially, this covers the steps an institution like US, for instance, has to take in order to reach the top of the quality of technical education. Yeah, the contents of presentation I want to present so that you are aware of what topics I want to cover. First of all, I'll speak about the assessment of quality of higher education institutions in India, both the general education as well as technical education. Then I will look at the relationships globally of the International Engineering Alliance, Washington Accord, which has gained importance recently because India became, the NBA became a signatory of the Washington Accord. I'll explain what it means and what the advantages are in belonging to such an accord. Accord means an agreement. ABET is the Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology, which has been the pioneer globally of accreditation initiatives. And NBA is our own accreditation board for engineering and technology, National Board of Accreditation. I will look at the origin of NBA, the recent transformations it has had to undergo because it is a member of signatory of the Washington Accord. I will make a comparison between the US system and the Indian system. Then I will indicate the positive consequences of accreditation in our country. I will go back about 40 years and explain to you the differences that existed between public institutions and private institutions. Please mute your mic. Then, since NBA wanted to become a signatory of the Washington Accord, some changes had to be made in the NBA structure and the procedures. I'll look at some of them and explain the difference between learning objectives and learning outcomes. In your workshop this time also, people are talking about learning outcomes. And OBTL or OBE, OBE is outcomes-based education, and OBTL is outcomes-based teaching and learning. And look at TQM, which is an important concept in industry and business for engineering education, how it, what it means for engineering education. And benchmarking is a term that is constantly used again. NIRF, for instance, a National Institutional Ranking Framework that our ministry has undertaken. One of the important principles is benchmarking. It helps you to benchmark your institution with reference to or in comparison to other institutions. So let's see what it means. Then some philosophical reflections on academic quality. Do we understand what academic quality means? Because we keep measuring it in terms of NIRF, in terms of accreditation and so on. And then there are some institutions in the world, including India, some in India, which are considered to be institutions of excellence. It's a perception. So what are the characteristics of these institutions so that you can benchmark yourself with reference to those institutions? Next, let me look at another important thing which has been gaining in importance recently worldwide, and that is the global rankings. India and Indian institutions and Indian educators, we have our own perceptions about global rankings, so let's take a look at them. In addition to global rankings, which are made typically by two important global ranking systems, all the many magazines and newspapers in India, they also rank institutions. I am sure that every year when India Today or Careers 360 or such magazines, they rank, Times of India also does that. When they publish the rankings, you look at it carefully to find out if your institution finds a place in these rankings and at what level you have been ranked. And a research university is really what you are, what the IITs are, and almost all good institutions globally, they're all research universities. I pointed out yesterday that the new education policy classifies institutions into three types: teaching intensive, research intensive, and teaching plus research. You are, for instance, a teaching plus research institution. Anatomy meaning, what are the constituents of this research university? I spoke about it in the introduction yesterday. We'll take a look at it in a little more detail. And the excellence is a journey. It is not a destination, as they say. And globally, again, what is the challenge for engineering education, for teachers, for educational leaders, and so on? And I asked some provocative questions. Now, let me start with the first section. What are the different systems and procedures for assessment and accreditation of quality of higher education institutions in India? Because assessment and accreditation are two different terms, they are indeed quite different. And NAAC, for example, is a National Assessment and Accreditation Council. There again, you see that assessment is different from accreditation. Let us look at the history of accreditation in our country. How did the Accreditation Board, National Accreditation Board, NBA, we are beholden to submit our documents and get accredited. It is mandatory now. How did it start? ISTE, I'm sure many of your faculty members and even students are members of ISTE, the Indian Society for Technical Education. So it is like the Institution of Engineers, but then it covers all the technical education stakeholders, namely the faculty and the students. I'm sure many of your faculty members are members of ISTE. You may even have a chapter of ISTE in your institution. Kameshwara, do you have an ISTE chapter?
Yes, sir. We have in our college, sir.
Okay. So it was ISTE which started thinking about accreditation of technical institutions. I still remember there was a workshop we had in Mysore, in Das Prakash, around 1990. And many of us got together, government officials, teachers, educators, and so on, to find out how to certify and guarantee quality in technical education. So we prepared the manuals, one for the institution and another for the programs, individual program, the financing of it, the organization of structure of this accreditation board, and so on. That's where the discussion started. Then, when AICTE became a statutory body in 1987, as I pointed out yesterday, as a result of the education policy, then many boards were set up. A board for undergraduate education, board for postgraduate education, and also a board for accreditation. This was in the year 1994. Subsequently, when we applied for membership of the Washington Accord, then we were supposed to be independent, the AICTE and the NBA. And so NBA was made an autonomous body on January 7, 2010. That was the beginning of our membership of the Washington Accord. Again, because of the nature of AICTE, you know that technical education covers not only engineering and technology, but also management, architecture, pharmacy, hotel management and catering technology, and applied arts and crafts. You cannot look at the logic of these things, but it was indeed technical education was supposed to cover all these aspects. It's one central body which looks at all these aspects. Pharmacy, for instance, again, I pointed out yesterday, like architecture, there are councils, Council of Architecture, Pharmacy Council of India, which also define the structure of these programs, the nature of subjects, the different proportions of the subjects, and so on. So they are independent councils, and again, as I pointed out yesterday, they are now PSSB, professional standard setting bodies. They participate in the overall nature of regulation, but they don't have independent regulatory role under the new policy. Now, NBA covers not only UG courses, PG courses, and even diploma courses. Simultaneously, in 1994, the UGC, the University Grants Commission, set up NAC, National Assessment and Accreditation Council, as a society. Remember that it was the same year in which NBA was constituted. Under the new directions of the National Education Policy, now we have a meta-accrediting body, NAC, National Accreditation Council, which is different from NAC. NAC is one part of NAC. Now, NAC covers essentially general, non-professional education, not technical education, for which NBA is the concerned body. So NAC covers universities and autonomous colleges. However, some engineering colleges have also sought accreditation from NAC. I see that you have also secured NAC accreditation under a 4-point maximum, and you would have got the 3-point something. Now, the mandatory nature of accreditation for technical institutions, the relevant body or the relevant accreditation system is NBA, not NAC. Although the NAC accreditation feeds the input into the NIRF, or the National Institutional Ranking Framework. There is another quality assurance system, which is ISO 9000. I also see that your institute has got ISO 9000. There are several engineering colleges who have also opened ISO 9000. What is the origin of ISO 9000? When India liberalized its commerce and industry and business in 1991, first liberalization, massive liberalization, then we wanted to partner, we wanted to collaborate with international institutions, similar institutions, and particularly in Europe, they expected that the quality standards would be maintained through ISO 9000. There are several bodies which certify institutions for ISO 9000. It is at that time, 1991, around 1991, that all industry and business and commerce, they sought ISO 9000. And several engineering colleges have also obtained ISO 9000. Like I said, you have got ISO 9000. When I was director of IIT Madras, I sought and got ISO certification for our non-academic programs. For academic programs, the relevant systems and processes are through the Board of Accreditation. But for non-academic processes, in an engineering college, for instance, you have your finance, your workshop, you have labs, and so on. All of them can be certified for quality through ISO 9000. One of the ways of publicizing ISO 9000 achievement in an institution is by displaying the quality policy throughout the institution so that everybody remembers this is what you have committed for. These are the considerations of quality that you have said that you would undertake. So I hope in your institution also you have the quality policy statements all over the place in the classrooms, outside the offices, and things like that. I'll explain the essence of ISO 9000 in a minute. Several magazines have also have been ranking engineering institutions. In the US, it is the US News and World Report, which is a very important ranking system. And the university presidents, for instance, attach a great deal of importance to the ranking of their institution under this report. In India, you have India Today, Outlook, DataQuest, Career 360. Many of them, every year they publish these rankings, and university leaders consider them to be a mark of achievement, a badge of approval, and that it is considered to be important. In addition, in India, we have what is called NABL, which is an autonomous body under DST, Department of Science and Technology. This is the National Accreditation Board for testing and calibration of labs. For example, in terms of measurements, They are related to the National Physical Laboratory. And if you are certifying some materials as having specific strength and so on, structural engineering in your civil engineering department, then your lab systems and methods would be certified. They would be made compatible with the DST body NABL requirements. Only then will it have validity where it matters. There's also a NABET for business membership organizations. Although you have ISO 9000, you may or may not have thought about this. The essence of ISO 9000 can be captured in 4 statements. Those of you who have participated in your ISO 9000 process will remember that you have to document everything that you do. You have to say clearly what you do, what your system does. As I mentioned, for engineering colleges, I believe it is the non-academic processes which can be certified for ISO, finance workshops and so on. You must indicate clearly, document what you do in great detail. It's rather tedious, but it has to be done. Once you have said what you do, then you have to do what you say. That stands to reason. The third aspect of it is you have to prove it to your ISO 9000 inspectors. You have to prove that this you are doing. And the ISO, like accreditation, is a journey. It is a journey of continuous improvement. Every day you improve your systems and processes to be better than what they were yesterday. Therefore, improvement is also an important consideration. So these are the 4 statements which capture the essence of ISO 9000. I'm sure your heads of departments and your principal would know the basic difference between approval and accreditation. But faculty members usually do not give much importance to this because this is not an academic issue. It is an administrative issue. There's a big difference between approval and accreditation. Approval, there is an approval handbook, AICTE approval handbook. You fulfill the prerequisites for starting an institute. Before you start the institution, you have to fulfill the amount of land, the amount of please mute your mic. The faculty members, their qualifications and so on, as per AICTE for technical education and UGC for general education, the norms and standards are prescribed, and you have to fulfill all these requirements. And only then will you be approved. You will be visited by a visiting committee. They will check whether all these prerequisites are available. That is approval. Sometimes it is also called recognition, but the proper word is approval. Accreditation is the assessment of the performance of the institution after
बाहर निकलने वाला मैस वाला बोर्ड है इतना थोड़ा सी जगह पे मतलब कोई इतना ही डायगनली जरूर है.
There is a protocol in online education. It has to be followed, otherwise the whole system will become chaotic. Please mute your mic. Only one mic will be on, and that is the presenter's mic. Okay, after 2 batches have graduated, then you are able to evaluate the performance of the institution in terms of results, in terms of the placement of the graduates and so on. So 2 batches should have graduated, 5 years for BTech or BE, and 3 years for MBA or PGDM. So this is as much as the introduction that I want to give. Now let me take a look at the relationships between the International Engineering Alliance, the Washington Accord, ABET, and NBA. They're all related to each other, and let me look at some of the details. The International Engineering Alliance is a global alliance of accreditation bodies for different aspects of education. The Washington Accord is the accord which is a part of the International Engineering Alliance for engineering undergraduate programs. Now, why is it called Washington Accord? Can somebody indicate the reason? Okay, the feedback is not coming. Because it was signed in Washington, D.C., what 8 or 6 or 7 countries, I'll indicate the names of the country, they got together. The reason why Washington Accord exists, I'll explain also in a minute. Similarly, for the engineering technology programs, which is equivalent to our diploma programs, 3-year diploma programs, the accord was signed in Sydney, and therefore it is called Sydney Accord. And for engineering technician, ITI graduates, it was signed in Dublin, and therefore it's called Dublin Accord. These are 3 general accords. In addition, we also have a region-specific agreement. APEC is Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation. Malaysia, Singapore, and India is also a part of it. There is an engineers mobility forum. This is a professional engineers register, and the Indian signatory in this forum is the Institution of Engineers. Again, I am sure that many of you are fellows and members of Institution of Engineers. There is also Engineering Technologies Forum for the diploma education. Now I have a very busy slide which indicates the criteria for international recognition. After the world has globalized in terms of education and business and industry and so on, there is intermobility of professionals across different regions. And how do you look at our degrees and diplomas and so on in comparison with those of the United States, those of the UK, Australia, Malaysia, and Singapore? So this establishes the equivalence, substantial equivalence of the different programs. This is a very busy slide, but I will only explain the important aspects of this. It is all based on problem analysis, the extent of and intensity of problem analysis. Washington Accord, the engineers, they are supposed to be able to identify, formulate, research the literature, and solve complex engineering problems. I'll explain to you a little later on what exactly this means. Think about it in the meantime. What do complex engineering problems mean? So at the highest level of complexity, engineers are able to solve problems using mathematics and engineering science. Sydney Accord for technologies, for instance, they do not look at complex engineering problems, but the ability to solve broadly defined engineering problems. And Dublin Accord, where they are able to identify and solve well-defined problems. So the level of complexity increases from technician to engineers. I'll explain, as I said, what complex engineering problems are. It's very important for all of us engineering teachers, professionals, to understand the meaning of Washington Accord. NBA is now a permanent signatory to the Washington Accord. So what are our responsibilities? What are our privileges? What is the goal of Washington Accord? Working together collaboratively to advance 2 things. One is benchmarking, and the second is mobility in the engineering profession. Mobility, you understand. If your graduates want to practice engineering in England, for instance, so there must be some specific equivalences that have to be established. Substantial equivalence, again, I'll explain that in a minute, and benchmarking to continue to improve your systems and processes by looking at other institutions which are doing better, and therefore bring their practices into our institution. Let me spend a couple of minutes on this applicability in our NIRF. Can somebody tell me what your NIRF ranking is? Sambashura, what is your NIRF ranking?
Sir, we didn't get, sir.
Oh, so you haven't been found eligible for that. But what basically it means is they give rankings up to 100 and beyond, and depending upon very well-defined criteria. Take a look at the document that is available on the website of AICTE, for instance. You will realize that what it means is, suppose an institution is ranked 99 and you're ranked 50. Then between 50 and 99, there are 4 other levels of quality and excellence. And you can climb up to the 50th position from 99 by looking at what other institutions are doing well and doing better than you are. So whenever you send your faculty members for a conference outside or a meeting outside, impress upon them the responsibility that they have in finding out how you are doing certain things and how the other institutions are doing it. And if they are better than you are, through the ranking system or accreditation system, try to import their habits, their practices into your own system. For example, when I was director of IIT Madras, we had several issues about the hostels. In every institution, I'm sure, the hostels are a big issue. So you have large numbers of students, and you have to provide them, for instance, the breakfast and the lunch and things like that in a prompt and efficient manner. And after the meals are taken, you have to make the place clean again for the next batch to come in. Therefore, how do you do this? And how do you make the cooking processes hygienic, particularly now with the pandemic? All this becomes important. So you study the systems that other institutions have created, and you try to import those practices into your own system. That is benchmarking. Now, brief background of the Washington Accord. It all started in 1989 by 6 engineering education accrediting bodies from these countries. And it's important to note that all of them are English-speaking countries. At the moment in Washington Accord, you have accreditation bodies from Russia, Germany, and so on. They are not only English-speaking countries, but others. It is important to note that it is a non-governmental agreement. The government doesn't come into the picture. It is essentially the profession which defines and dictates the different types of processes and systems. And it emphasizes peer review. Again, one point I want to make, peer review is extremely important in academic systems. It is in government, peer review appears to a certain extent, but in the professions, it is the basis for all decisions. For example, your PhD viva, for instance, is assessed by peers from other institutions. Your publications, before they are published in good journals, they are assessed by peers. I'm sure many of your faculty members also receive requests for reviewing papers and proposals and so on. So peer review is extremely important. Let me read out these italicized words. Washington Accord recognizes the substantial equivalency of accreditation systems. It is not point-to-point or item-to-item equivalency. Overall, if the outcomes are substantially equivalent and they are assessed by equivalent systems, then you accept that the systems are overall equivalent. To assess that the graduates of accredited programs are prepared to practice engineering at the entry level to the profession. At the entry level to the profession, it's a 4-year program, bachelor's degree program, to practice engineering, to participate in industry and commerce, not for teaching. So it is to practice engineering at the entry level to the profession, which certifies the substantial equivalence. Therefore, the focus is on the 4-year minimum undergraduate program. Now here, as of July 2011, there were 14 full signatories. I haven't updated this. I didn't see any reason for doing that, but look at the internet and you will find the current number of members and so on. Maybe in the next presentation, I will put the latest one. For example, take Turkey. It is not the government of Turkey, but it is the Association for Evaluation and Accreditation of Engineering Programs. So they joined Washington Accord in 2011. And it started. A couple of curious instances here. China was not full signatory till recently. Maybe they are now. But even in 2007, the Chinese Taipei accreditation body was a member. And Hong Kong, China was also a member. These are interesting political facts. Now, in 2011, there were 5 provisional signatories. There's a provision for you to be accepted into the system as a provisional signatory, subject to detailed assessment of your accreditation procedures. You see here, non-English speaking Germany, Russia, and India was also at that time, 2007. But we are now a full signatory to the Washington Accord. Next, I am going to speak about AICTE. Accreditation Board for Engineering and Technology. Why do I do this? Because it was the pioneer in accreditation processes. It started as ECPD, Engineering Council for Professional Development, and now we all follow every other accreditation system in the world. They follow the ABET practices because they are the front runners, they are the pioneers. You will see the importance of ABET by looking at what is ABET. Well, I will make a detailed comparison between ABET and NBA. NBA is a part of the government in a way. It is a society, but still it is related to the government. It is dictated by the government agencies. But here, ABET is a confederation of professional societies. If you're a mechanical engineer, you look at ASME as the supreme body whose practices, whose publications are important for you. Similarly, IEEE, for instance. These are the world's best professional societies, and the confederation of such important professional societies, that is ABET. So it has an enormous amount of credibility. I'm going through the historical nature of the progression of ABET procedures, essentially because you will understand then why we are following in a large way ABET procedures and so on. Now, one of the important aspects of ABET accreditation is the definition in year 2000 of A to K competencies, that is A to K is 11. It answers the question, you are educating and training engineers, right? So for what purpose? What do you expect them to do after graduation? Okay, down here is an indicative list of 11 competencies you must give to them. It is not reading, understanding, comprehension, and so on. You look at Bloom's taxonomy, and as you move into the higher levels of the capabilities, that is what you're expecting your engineers to do. Ability to apply knowledge of math, science, and engineering. These are called the STEM subjects: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Now they have added another A. STEAM, it is called, science, technology, including arts, liberal arts, for instance, that's also considered to be important for an engineer. So it is the application of the knowledge, not an understanding or an awareness of knowledge. And design is the essence of engineering, and therefore you provide to him the ability, him or her, the ability to design and conduct experiments, analyze data. You go through them, you will realize that these are all important aspects of engineering you want to teach to your students. So, in 2008 to take competencies, again, I will give you a little bit of history of the evolution of these competencies. Now, about 2 years ago, again, there was a review and feedback received from the faculty members and the accreditors and so on. And they revised the criteria 3 and 5. And 3 refers to student outcomes and 5 refers to the curriculum. A number of major changes were made. And the 11 criteria A to K, they were converted into 7 topic areas, and new criteria were evolved. These refer to engineering problem solving, engineering design, measurement, testing, and quality assurance, communication skills, professional responsibility, professional growth, and teamwork and project management. So in each of them, criteria were defined. So under student outcomes, now we have 7 of them. Now we had A to K, and they have been replaced by these 7. An ability to identify, formulate, and solve complex engineering problems. I'll explain what this complex means by applying principles of engineering, science, and mathematics. Similarly, there are 3 others, and totally there is 7 of these criteria. We have been talking about complex engineering problems, and you have to provide your engineers with the ability, the competence to solve complex engineering problems. So, of course, if I've been actually talking to you, I would have asked you what each one of you thinks about what a complex engineering problem is. But I will give you the, so it's not an answer, but it is the combined wisdom of engineering educators, it has been incorporated into the following kind of a definition. Complex engineering problems include one or more of the following characteristics that covers a wide range of problems. Involves wide-ranging or conflicting technical issues. Remember that engineering solutions typically involve a trade-off, the advantages versus the disadvantages, and you take the optimum combination of different parameters. So cost versus efficiency, for instance, that may be one trade-off that you have to arrive at, you have to decide on. It does not have an obvious solution. It's not something like a simple mathematical or arithmetic issue. It is complex. Addressing problems not encompassed by current standards and codes. Engineering is very different from science, for instance, in our having standards and codes. So ASME, standard for design of pressure vessels, for instance. Every time you don't make detailed calculations, many times the properties of materials are not completely known. Therefore, you go by codes. If it follows these codes, and these codes and standards are validated by detailed analysis and experiments. Therefore, if it has worked in 99% of the cases, then you apply those standards and codes for design of a new system. More characteristics. It involves diverse groups of stakeholders. Look at an environmental problem, the siting of a nuclear power plant and so on. You have a wide range of stakeholders. Some of them get the benefit. Some of them, they have to suffer some kind of inconvenience. So you have to take a look at all the stakeholders together and arrive at the final solution. It includes many subsystems. It involves multiple disciplines, and it involves it has high consequences, significant consequences in a range of contexts. So all these put together, they define complex problems. So go back and think about what your own concept or perception of complexity in problems, and then you compare them with what we have been indicated here. AICTE defines learning objectives. There are terms which are used synonymously, and it confuses people. Similarly, NBA also has learning objectives. I will skip this slide. In fact, I'm going to leave this presentation with you. Therefore, if you want clarification of some of these ideas, you can go back to them. A very important aspect of engineering education, technical education, is outcome assessment of outcome. It is a method for determining whether students have learned. So you have given a lecture, and you have to contemplate all that you have taught. Have the students learned? And if they have not learned fully, then you must find out why they have not learned fully and what it is that you have to do for remedial instruction or repetition, for instance, in order to make sure what you expect them to have learned, they have actually learned. This is an important assessment of outcomes. The students must also retain many of the ideas that you have taught them. No point in saying everything is available in the internet or in encyclopedias or handbooks. Therefore, you expect for example, the law of thermodynamics, whatever. You don't want them to go back to the book and read and become a part of your repertoire, your competence. Therefore, you also need to retain materials that apply what you have been taught. That is involves outcomes assessment. Okay, email. And assessment plans have three components. I've indicated them here. It also involves feedback. I'm sure you have in your institution questionnaires for eliciting from students what they think about the course and what they think about the faculty member who has taught the course. Why is this feedback loop established? So that you can determine what has gone well, what has not gone well, and therefore base your future actions on the basis of the analysis. NBA has prescribed and described the quality criteria for accreditation. You will use these criteria in preparing your self-assessment report. preparation of the self-assessment report is an extremely important activity in accreditation. It helps you to reflect on what you are doing and what the best practices are, and how you have to incorporate these best practices into your own system. Before you ask information on the program and at the institute level, the description of systems and processes, then both of them are evaluated. Let me also point out here the basic difference between NAC and NBA. NBA looks at individual programs. Mechanical engineering, for instance, the undergraduate program is evaluated differently. The postgraduate program is evaluated differently. Whereas NAC is an evaluation of the entire institution. Obviously, therefore, the NAC is a more superficial analysis of your systems and processes, and NBA looks at the individual programs in great detail. I hope you have caught the difference between the two. NBA is program level accreditation, and NAC is overall institutional evaluation. So there are many of these things: the vision, mission, and program, educational objective, curriculum, and so on. It comes to a total of 780 points. You will notice that in ABET there are no such points. It is highly judgmental in nature. At the institute level, the criteria refer to the first year academics. As the freshman enters your institution, he enters with a certain amount of prior learning and with a certain amount of gaps in his learning. And the first year is extremely important in engineering institution. And then student support systems and governance and institutional support 220, and a grand total of 1,000. Quick comparison between ABET and NBA. It is important to realize that, because I've been talking about ABET as the comparison, the benchmark comparison. So what are the basic differences, and why these differences, why they are not identical? ABET is the pioneer and program-based accreditation. It started out as ECPD from 1942, almost a century back. And the NBA was established as a constituent board of AICTE in 1987, became a society in 2010. Now, since 2000, the accreditation criteria are based on EC 2000, the landmark departure from the earlier systems. Those of you who have participated in NBA accreditation from the beginning will even now we use the point system. It is based on, it used to be based only on inputs and processes. How many faculty members do you have with what qualifications, how much area do you have, built-up space do you have, and things like that. Now, since we applied for membership in Washington, we have started focusing on outcomes-based education. Now, everybody who goes through accreditation knows what outcomes-based education or outcomes-based teaching and learning means. We are able to define learning objectives and outcomes. Both of them are program-wise accreditation. Both of them are undertaken after 2 batches are graduated. In fact, when we designed the NBA, I was involved in it very closely. We looked at the ABET processes, the other institutional processes, and we wanted to be globally compatible with these systems. ABET is a federation of 34 professional societies. NBA is an autonomous registered society. Accreditation system, this is important. ABET is yes or no. The new education policy is also stressing on the fact that our accreditation system also must be a binary.
Good morning, everyone.
Yes. Do you want to say something? No, this is a general good morning. Okay. Then accreditation decision, if you remember in NBA, originally it was in the form of...
Is the syllabus visible to all?
Please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. Please mute your mic. That is one of the protocols of online learning.
In this, we have covered meaning, definition, sources. Methods and sources are one and the same thing. Sources and methods of recruitment. Fine. Direct method, indirect method. That is a big topic. Sources are there, that is your internal and external sources. Methods are your direct and indirect methods, which we have covered yesterday. Moving on, we have one thing in this techniques e-recruitment and outsourcing, and one thing is just process of recruitment. These two are left over. Today we will do this e-recruitment and outsourcing. We will see this process later.
Taking place.
Hello, sir. Kindly unmute yourself. Your mic, sir. Hello, sir. Hello, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Now, originally it was in the form and nature of ABC. Now, recently it has been in the nature of 5-year accreditation or 3-year accreditation. But the education policy also talks about binary accreditation decisions, just yes or no, because that is the global procedure. AICTE, it is mainly judgmental. I will give you a list of partial list of institutions in India whose programs have been accredited by AICTE, because it's possible to do that also. If you talk to them about the procedures involved, they're so much different from NBA. There is a great deal of discussion that takes place, corrections that take place, and ultimately it is judgmental. They qualified, trained, accredited. They analyze the different things that they have noticed, and then they make a decision. Whereas in NBA, it is a question of points allotted to different criteria. This has an advantage in the sense it avoids legal issues, whereas here discussions will go on forever. Now, both of them are based on a 3-day visit and a very deep. Some of you who might have participated as auditors will realize it is a highly tedious and painstaking setup for decisions you have to take, and a number of things that you have to look at in addition to reading or studying the very long self-assessment report. Evaluators have to undergo competence training. They must understand what it is that they are assessing. Whereas in our country, NAC does a better job than NBA, or evaluation training is cursory. I'll explain to you the details of trainings. Now, AICTE was a founding member of Washington Accord. Now we have gone through different stages. And at one point of time, it was realized that, you see, if you're not doing as well as you're expected to do, then it requires changes in the system. Now, an autonomous institution can make changes, but an affiliated institution, if it wants to make any changes, it has to go through the university, the other affiliated colleges, and so on. Therefore, I do not know how many of you know that in India, at the moment, there's only 20% of our higher education institutions which are autonomous. Every time a policy is announced, we cry out for autonomy to be provided to all these. And it's an interesting thing that autonomy is to be given and it is to be taken. It is to be given by if we are an affiliated institution, the affiliating university, and it has to be taken by the institution which is asking for autonomy. Now, when the RECs were made into NITs, I was one of the members who went around different RECs and tried to find out how much receptivity there was in them accepting the new system of NITs. When RECs became NITs, two important things happened. RECs were affiliated institutions, NITs are autonomous institutions. So RECs were regional institutions and NITs are national institutions. These are the two major differences. When we went around and asked the faculty members and the staff members whether they wanted autonomy, many of them did not want autonomy. They, in fact, thought that they even had implications for salary structures and things like that. So, since 80% of our institutions are not autonomous, they're affiliated institutions, Washington Accord permitted NBA to classify our institutions into Tier 1 autonomous institutions and Tier 2 affiliated colleges. Tier 1 institutions would be subject to Washington Accord standards, and Tier 2 would be subject to national standards. So there are major differences between AICTE and NBA. And we do not want to import the AICTE systems into our country because the contexts are different. The way we have been doing things are different, history is different, and therefore we have to define our own systems but taking into consideration the good practices of ABET. That is the lesson. Now, ABET is allowed to accredit engineering institutions and programs in other countries, and so there are some certain conditions. Autonomy has to be maintained of the Indian accreditation. What are the institutions in India which have the programs accredited by ABET? Here is a partial list. The Vellore Institute of Technology, the SRM University, Thapar Institute of Engineering and Technology, LPS team, Mukesh Patel's Technology and Management Institute of NMMIS University, Manipal University. Therefore, if you are looking for experiences of Indian institutions whose programs are accredited by ABET, contact any one of them. Go to the internet and look at any other institutions also. Should you go for ABET accreditation? My short answer is no. There are reasons why I would say that. NBA is much more important for us than ABET. Once you have got NBA and done well, and if you want to import global practices, then you have to look at ABET. Some of these points I'll skip. Now, in these accreditation of engineering programs, you need to define program educational objectives. Dr. Ashok Saxena is a dean from the University of Arkansas. He has now moved over somewhere else. He spent a couple of years in an Indian institution, I forget the name of the institution. And so he helped that institution to get prepared for ABET accreditation. So in the process, you have to define program educational objectives. So these are typical samples of what he produced, created for them for the MTech Mechanical Engineering program, undergraduate program. Going to the details, the information is available with you. Now, while you are preparing for accreditation, a question constantly asked is, well, he has prepared these three. Can I just copy these things for my institution? Well, the answer is yes and no. Just because if you consider this to be something which cannot be improved upon, okay, you copy them for your own institution. But then when the accreditation process actually takes place, you have to demonstrate that you have incorporated these into your system. So if you have done that, you have changed your system to be equivalent to this system, you have done better. Therefore, the accreditators will accept it. Ultimately, it has to be approved by the accreditation system, evaluators, and they will ask you all kinds of questions. Just as in ISO 9000, you have to demonstrate, you have to prove that you are doing what you have said you would be doing. Therefore, copying is okay as long as you can make sure that the system is changed or system is transformed in order to prove that you are actually doing this. This is sample program objective. Typically, they are short in number, 1 or 2 or 3, typically 3. That's what he has given for them. Again, like A to K, you have program outcomes similar to A to K. There are 12 that NBA has given. So each of them also has to be individually created. Now, there is a mapping that takes place between PEOs and POs. Let me spend a couple of minutes on this. PEOs, we have looked at 3 of them for that institution, and POs are 12 as specified by NBA. And you look at each one of them, and then you rate them in terms of whether it is the correlation or significance is low or significant or high. This is something which gives you an overall perspective on what you have done. And in a little more detail, you have got the typical courses, and then the 1 to 12, and then you establish the correlation. This is in an even more detailed manner, so I won't go into any more details. But you need to have a mentor to help you to go through accreditation, an external member who has been an evaluator, therefore he understands what it is that is being, information is being sought. So you have him as your mentor who can guide your heads of departments and the faculty members to go through these processes. You cannot do it internally. Don't expect an internal member because you need an outside perspective. This is my advice to institutions who they want to do it. There are assessment tools, indirect measures and direct measures, and it is all captured in this slide. These are the assessment tools and their role in measuring outcomes, because outcomes measurement is important. I see that even in your pedagogy lectures, faculty, I mean, your resource persons are talking about outcomes and their measurements. There are direct measures, there are details here, indirect measures, and together they form the continuous quality improvement plan or the journey towards improvement. Now, this is again something that faculty members ask for guidance. What are the targets for demonstrating that outcomes are being attained? Sample targets. If you say that something has to be done, is it 100% of the students and 100% of each one of them should score? No. But here are some examples. Again, you can copy this, but it has to be reflected in the processes that you have in your system. 70% of the students, if they score 65% or higher in the question related to outcomes measurement, then that is enough, because you cannot have 100% of students scoring 100%. No, not every student scores 100%. But if you're talking about design, because design is the essence of engineering, all students, without fail, will pass the design course, not with 100% mark, but 65% or better marks, etc. Now, one of the things that accreditation teaches us is you want to make measurement of qualitative factors. You cannot have detailed answers and statistical analysis and so on. You look at surveys. You make employer survey, you make alumni survey, you make student survey. And here I'm giving some examples. These are taken from Ashok Saxena's analysis. So the employer, for instance, the people who employ your students, your graduates, your training and placement officer will be helpful in gathering this information and analyzing it. So a general question, how would you rate the technical preparedness of our graduates? Yes, they have undertaken exams, they have scored their grades and so on, but with reference to what you require in your job, the different jobs that you take them for, what is the technical preparedness? Poor, marginal, acceptable, good, and excellent. You ask them to rate these. And please focus on hires as people whom you have hired from 2 or 3 years ago from our university, and rate their performance relative to your expectations. You take them because you expect them to fulfill certain requirements. With reference to that, and you are receiving these graduates from our institution, now please rate. Are the preparedness less than expected, met expectations, or exceeded expectations? Similarly, there are other questions. You ask them and you analyze this information in order to improve your own system. What is the objective? Because you want to make your future graduates better than the current graduates. Similarly, you sample the alumni. Alumni are very important because they can give the feedback about your own systems, their ability to succeed in their future careers. There are many other aspects of the reason why you should survey the alumni. Alumni are also sort of sorts of ideas. In addition, they can also be a sort of funds for building new labs, for creating new projects and so on. These are details of these aspects. I won't go into the details. I know that I have to cover a lot of information. I won't do that. I will cover whatever I am dealing with properly. The rest of it, the information are available. This is a slide. I missed it. There I'm back. Okay. All right. So till now, I have looked at the accreditation systems and processes and how you have to evaluate your own products in terms of outcomes in order to do better in the coming years. Now, I want to spend 3 or 4 minutes on the history of AICTE accreditation to tell you, if you think accreditation is tedious, it is painstaking, it is very difficult, I want to tell you that you're not alone. Originally in the year 2000, when the new criteria were proposed in the US, the faculty members were not at all convinced. They said, for example, take a look at institutions like MIT and Stanford and so on. Hey, we are doing very well. We think we are doing well. Who are you guys to come and tell us that we should do our processes better? So there was a lot of resistance. So it's a small diversion from what I've been talking about. So the focus of NBA and that of ABET prior to the year 2000, the EC 2000 engineering criteria were proposed as a result of a study of 3 years of many committees, many faculty members, many surveys, and so on. So as I pointed out, originally it was on the basis of inputs and input parameters and processes. Long questionnaires, lack of focus. Your faculty members, when they complete the self-assessment report, they will realize it is an extremely tedious and painstaking effort. Tedious but straightforward. Then EC 2000 was a very big change. It was accepted by the Washington Accord countries. Similarly, I remember when we introduced accreditation as a result of the AICTE meeting, some of the younger people may not know, younger faculty members, that about 50 years ago, we had two types of institutions: government institutions funded by the government and private institutions as a result of private initiative. And in between, of course, you came institutions which were assisted partly by the government. In your own institute, you might have courses which are funded by your private initiative, and also by courses which are also supported by the government. So at that time, it was difficult to persuade private institutions to go through this examination process, the accreditation process. So we conducted a large number of workshops. I was a part of it. I'm old enough to be able to recount our experiences, and then we had to give them incentives. If you undertake accreditation for your programs, it will do you good, it will do your students good, and it will do the country good. A large number of workshops we organized all over the country. Similarly, there they had to do that with the NSF, National Science Foundation assistance, with the AICTE, American Society for Engineering Education, with their assistance and so on. So in 2002, when I was in Baltimore talking to the executive secretary, director of ABET, George Peterson, so he said we wanted our own accreditation systems to be a part of the global community. And he said India and China pose problems. You have so many institutions. How do we certify that programs are equivalent, substantial equivalence of programs, and so on? Singapore, at that time, they only had two national institutions. There are only a few institutions, therefore it is manageable. You can in fact go point by point and compare them. In India, how do we do that? So that problem has been solved through the Washington Accord, as I said, substantial equivalence. I was wrong in saying it was 2 years. It took them 8 years to review and reflect on its systems. It took 8 years to modify their accreditation processes. You can go through this at your leisure, you will realize what all went. So what are the problems to be resolved? They identified them, and they also realized it not be easy to implement EC 2000. Now, an interesting aside here, the then ASW president, he wrote a paper in the ASW publication PRISM. Even today, PRISM is a very credible source of information on what is happening in US education. Around that time, there was an essay written by Elizabeth Kubler. Spent a little time thinking about what I am saying. Her article was called On Death and Dying. On Death and Dying. So EC 2000 represented the death of the old system and the birth of a new system. So what are the implications that you can compare with? So Kubler-Ross referred to 5 stages of grief a person undergoes upon learning of his or her impending death. As a result of a terminal disease, let us say, a person learns that he or she will die in a short period of time. So these are the stages she analyzed. First of all, denial. No, it's not happening to me. Anger. Why is it happening to me? Bargaining or negotiation. Depression. And finally, acceptance. So it has been combined into the acronym DA and DA. DA, negotiation, and so on. TCS applies these principles to the creation of new strategies and policies. I was a board member of one of the companies, and I have seen them utilize this analysis or this discussion. So Faisal, the ASW president, he said, yes, we have to go through these 5 processes, and also there is a 6th and final stage, and that is acceptance, not only acceptance, but enthusiastic involvement for the benefit of engineering education. So again, this is a way by which these ideas were accepted. AICTE also described a new engineering education which is becoming relevant today in the post-pandemic era. New engineering education is characterized by any time, any place, and any subject. Learner-driven rather than provider-driven, teacher-driven, coaching, mentoring, etc. Active discovery-based learning is the norm. So this applies very well to the current situation where you are looking at a new set of ideas. I'll skip some of these things. Again, you can go through them at your leisure. The design experience, just like complex problem solving, I explained to you, what it means is that you have to take into consideration the following factors: economic, environmental, sustainability, manufacturability, ethical, etc. That is the reason why design is so important. There have been many positive consequences of accreditation in India. I'll briefly describe them. Now, before we convince the private institutions to go through accreditation, many of them are not convinced of the benefits of accreditation. We have to tell them what they are. But once they were convinced of the benefits of accreditation, we found as we visited different institutions, they've started doing things that was expected by the accreditation system. For example, it calls for a vision, mission, and objectives, and the details of these things for each institution. Therefore, when we visited the principal's room, we found that there were plaques indicating the vision and mission of the institution. And nowadays, it is so common. I'm sure you also have not only your vision, mission, but also your quality policy exhibited throughout the institution. Why do we exhibit them throughout the institution? Because people, as they go through, the stakeholders, the faculty members, the people who give you jobs to your students and so on, they realize that these are the things uppermost in your mind, and these are all positive things which project a good image of the institution. And you will constantly look at them, and maybe once in 3 days, a concept appeals to you, and you start doing what it requires. Now, there are many initiatives of NBA which had to be changed to align with the Washington Accord. We had a couple of mentors from countries which had become members of Washington Accord. They advised us, advised the NBA, on what needs to be done in order that we would succeed as signatories to become signatories of Washington Accord. So I will not go through the details again. They're all available for you. Yeah. When you become evaluators, I'm sure some of your faculty members at least are part of teams which do this service for NBA. They go and accredit other institutions. The important thing is, in India, we have not given sufficient importance to the training and the characterization of the desirable properties of AICTE evaluators. Take a look at what AICTE considers to be important for evaluators. So many times, I have, as chairman of AICTE, I have received complaints from institutions saying, look, these people you have gathered from, let us say, the IITs and so on for evaluating our institution, but they are not doing the right thing. They're comparing their institutions with our institutions and say, oh, in our institutions we do this, therefore you should also do this. No, that's not the approach at all. You should really empathize with the institution that you are visiting and be guides and coaches for them to determine what it is that they are not doing well and they should be doing well to fulfill the requirements of the accreditation, the NBA accreditation. The approach is entirely different. So these are the characteristics of people. The desired competency, you should be technically current. You should be publishing papers in your area of expertise. And the desired proficiency, which is applied during the visit, campus visit, in order to make sure that you are of benefit to that institution for improving quality. You should be effective at communicating. Easily, you should conduct face-to-face interviews and so on. Interpersonally skilled, friendly. One of the communication skills that we want our students to have, and which I believe our faculty members should have, that you should have what is called listenability. Do you close your mouth, open your ears, and listen to people indicate to you what their perspectives and perceptions are? So listenability is an extremely important skill, not only be able to communicate by talking, but by listening. Is a difficult skill to cultivate. Then it should be team-oriented, not individual-based, professional. Again, go back to the internet and look at what a professional is. What are the professional competencies? Should be organized, and so on. And good evaluators are given by AICTE candidate training, and it involves two sets of training. One is an online learning experience, and the other one is face-to-face facilitated instruction, the so-called mock visits. So the online program consists of 20 to 25 hours of details which have to be gone through, and then at the end of the modules, you have to answer quizzes. And after that, there is a 1.5-day experiential workshop where the details of a visit are given to you and you are asked to make decisions. AICTE accredited institutions outside the US, I pointed out that there are many of our Indian institutions which have got AICTE accreditation for specific programs. But then when they come to India, for instance, they have to get the concurrence of AICTE and NBA to be able to accredit Indian programs. At the moment, they have accredited a large number of programs outside the US. Now, AICSB is the Association to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business. If you have an MBA program, the gold standard is AICSB accreditation. The point here I'm making is that they look at not the minimum amount of whatever is required to be available to be existing, but whether you have stated your mission and we have fulfilled your stated mission. You have achieved high quality and demonstrated innovation, impact, etc. It is 11:15. This is the end of my part one. I have this is a long presentation in two parts, which I normally give in two different sessions. But now I want to provide some time for you to ask questions. So let me stop here. Let me summarize. What is it that I have given to you? One aspect of quality assurance, namely accreditation, I looked at in great detail, both the Indian system as well as the AICTE system, because the AICTE system is something that all the other countries follow. They make a more detailed analysis of the objective, the philosophy of engineering education, and that's the reason I gave all the important details. A2K converted into 7 new criteria, and what NBA has done, what it had to do in order to become a signatory of the Washington Accord, etc. I've given many aspects of quality in engineering education. I've also looked at ISO, which you have. I have not looked at the other journey towards excellence and so on, which is the part 2. Now, let me stop here. It is better to look at a small number of things in sufficient detail rather than to just read on a large number of slides without detailed analysis. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me over the next 5 or 10 minutes. Discussion, doubt clearing and things. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I am requesting the participants to pose their doubts or questions.
Sir, good morning. This is Professor Karthikeyan from Kadalur.
Hello, good morning.
The session was really wonderful, sir. It was highly informative, and I would like to thank you for that. And to summarize my understanding, especially when you differentiated between habit and NBA, I understood NBA is mostly concentrates on input versus outcome, whereas NBA addresses input versus process. Am I right, sir?
No. Both of them look at outcomes-based education or outcomes-based teaching and learning. So NBA also looks at outcomes, learning outcomes. You have to define them and you have to prove that these are actually attained during the coverage of the curriculum. Both of them are identical. Identically correct, but both of them look at the same thing. Inputs and without financial, human, and physical inputs, you cannot achieve the curriculum and the availability of competencies. You cannot do it. They are required, but they have secondary importance. The major importance is your outcomes definition and how you achieve the outcomes.
Understood, sir. My question is, though in my opinion, accreditation criteria addresses progress through process control, I still doubt whether what is documented is really practiced. I would like to know, in your opinion, which accreditation ensures the proper alignment between documentation and practice, especially for engineering programs?
Both, I would say both of them do, but in a different manner. The different manner is essentially in the accreditation process itself. As I said, AICTE is largely judgmental. It involves a to and fro conversation, and both together arriving at a common understanding of what requires to be done. Whereas NBA, for various reasons, it is point-based, and the nature of judgment does not come into the picture as much.
Is it good for the institutions to start with the NAC and then to think of NBA?
No, NAC applies for general education, and NBA applies because it is program based, that is institution based.
In what way ISO 9000 helps in maintaining documentation pertaining to NBA, sir?
As I pointed out, ISO refers to non-academic processes, and accreditation is the only means of assessing academic processes. ISO cannot apply in a classroom, and that is a different set of processes which you want to apply quality criteria to. This is a different set. You can easily realize that the administrative process is different from an academic process.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions from the participants?
Hello, sir. Good morning. Sir, I'm Utpala Das from Tirthankar Mahavir University. So it's been a wonderful session. Loved every bit, understood every bit of your presentation. It was really, really good. So there's one question that often ruffles my mind. You know, sir, so you've talked about outcome-based education. you know, that we are all, in fact, in our university also, there has been a lot of sessions where they have stressed on, conducting lectures and devising plans that gives outcomes. I just want to ask you one thing, sir. How to create a balance? What happens, sir, many a times when we are into the classes, we have this fixed time frame. We have to conclude our chapters, and because of this COVID thing coming up, it has been really very difficult to conduct lectures within the stipulated time. I mean to say the session, the entire session. And then when we conduct outcome based learning, when we devise plans, we plan a lot of activities, we plan a lot of things, in fact, for the students. But at that time, sir, if we plan it for every student, like if we want outcomes, of course, we have to give importance. We have to make sure that every student is a participant in the activities that we conduct for them. So sometimes, what happens, we run short of time, sir. Either we will end up not completing our chapters properly. Of course, it's important. There's no more of conventional learning that used to happen in the past. But now that we are stepping into this outcome-based learning, the balance of the time and the activities and the lectures has become very difficult. How to achieve that, sir?
They're talking about two approaches to learning and
Yes, sir.
teaching and education.
Absolutely.
Time is constant, and the material, the curriculum, the understanding, and the A to K, etc., for example, are variable. The other one is time is variable and the content is constant. So look at the comparison between the two. What you're talking about is that time is constant. Time is not constant. If there is remedial instruction.
I mean to say, sir, the session. I mean to the session time. So we have to complete the chapters within 3 months or 4 months, that way, sir. So if we start, doing the activities for every student, for that, of course, that outcome that we want, sometimes it becomes very difficult and we kind of struggle with, completing our chapters on time. So that is one problem I feel is going to happen. What do you say? What do you opine about that, sir?
It's a practical issue. What you're saying is right. But then do you know
Yes,
that in advanced countries, for every hour of lecture, both the teacher
yes,
as well as the student spends 2 hours on his own. So that is the flipped classroom, right? An example is a flipped classroom. So the
yes, sir.
student and the teacher, they come prepared to the classroom to discuss the materials that were supposed to be covered, uncovered, etc. And then during class, the discussions take place in order to clarify the doubts, in order to expand the scope of things and so on. So our whole impression about the course as a session or semester-based thing does not really apply to true education. I understand the practical nature of what you're asking. And that is also the reason why the number of contact hours increasingly in advanced countries, it is coming down. The time which the student and the faculty member spend in the classroom is coming down, and the time spent outside the classroom through many exercises, many problems and projects and so on, they are going up. So we have to change the paradigm of education.
Yes.
This has to be done
Thank
only
you, sir.
central universities and regulatory bodies and so on, but things are happening in this direction.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
This is Eli Lavati, sir, from Srivasavi Engineering College, Andhra Pradesh, sir. So, I have one doubt, sir. You have given your session with clearly presented with each and every concept, sir. Thank you so much for that, sir. And my doubt is, sir, I am from computer science and engineering, sir.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sir. Some of the courses may confined within the stipulated time, sir. Suppose let it be 60 hours, it could be taken to complete the syllabus, sir. But few of the courses in CSE or whatever it may be, sir, may not concluded within the stipulated time, sir. But how could you manage that stipulated time? Let it be 60 hours for each and every course in the each branch, sir.
In a typical institution of high quality, which is imparting relevant education for the student, first of all, you have to define for yourself what the objective of your program is. Now, it is not defined by the number of hours, the number of textbooks, the number of questions, and so on. It is the ability to be able to become useful to industry or employer, to society, for instance. In order to do that, a number of things have to be done in different level of depth. So all of it cannot be taught. Teaching is what the teacher gives. In fact, I hope it is stopped. Teachers used to dictate notes to students. Now with the availability of information sources, you refer the student to a certain paper, technical paper or a book, and he is expected, most of the learning is expected to be done by the student himself, self-learning. And the online education also supports this concept, that much of it has to be learned by the student on his own, and to develop originality of thought. And again, the national education policy talks about the bad practice of students having to memorize things. So your evaluation assessment procedure has an important role to play in defining the scope of education. So particularly at the school level, I have heard that if in a particular problem, difference of 10 units of something sold at such and such a piece, and the total cost is so much. And in the question paper, for instance, the 10 is replaced by 15, and the students complain it is out of syllabus. So all this must go. The purpose of education is completely different. And otherwise, we will not be producing global learners for the 20th century to serve industry, commerce, and society of the 21st century. These things must go. I realize that it is not possible at the affiliated college level. Even at the autonomous college level, it has difficulties. So a lot of flexibility is to be built into the system. The education policy talks about this. I realize your practical difficulties, but it is the educational planners, the vice chancellors, and so on who have to take the initiative. I realize your difficulty. When I was a young faculty member, I also had the same problems, but fortunately, I served in an autonomous institute.
Yeah.
There is nothing like a syllabus.
Thank you so much, sir.
Coverage of that syllabus. And in fact, some people say it is the uncovering of the syllabus, not the covering of the syllabus. But that is not the issue. You should be able to solve problems which are related to that particular discipline of thought.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Professor Sambashiva Rao. I think we have slightly exceeded the time. The next faculty resource person may have some difficulty. So shall we close this?
Yes, sir. Definitely.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I'll see you again tomorrow.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. It was an awesome lecture given by you, sir. So we understand that the importance of NAC accreditation, NB accreditation, and ABET accreditation. And of course, the purpose of education varies from one system to another system. So this also we noted down. And so we are really thankful for your lecture, sir. Thank you very much for your time. Yes, sir.
I will do one thing. Yesterday, I sent you my PowerPoint to you. You
Yes,
got
sir.
them?
Yes, sir. I got it, sir. I have downloaded in the folder, sir.
Right. You distribute it only to those people who are truly interested in learning about these things, not to just have it in your file. Today, again, part 2, again, I will send to you part 1 and part 2. Part 2, students can read on their own, faculty members can read on their own. That includes the rankings and world-class universities and the excellence journey. So they will have access to all that material. Okay?
Sure, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you once again, sir. Thank you.
No.
So dear participants, we'll have next session at 11:30. So 5 minutes break we can take. Please stay in.